Off we go to the nation's capital, which we do each week here on Australia Overnight. On the weekend, we have a catch-up with our national political editor, Michael Packey, who is in lockdown and on the line. Hello, mate.
Hello, Luke. How are you? Yes, by the time the lockdown ends in the ACT, we would have been in lockdown for 9 weeks.
Wow.
For all of, anywhere between 11 cases. We had 30 cases that were reported on Friday. But, we're in this sort of a lockdown, here with, compared to New South Wales and Victoria, with so very few people with the virus, so many of the cases linked. You've got businesses which are shut down. I just find it amazing. You've got most of the ACT virtually vaccinated. Anyway, but...
Whenever I see the Chief Minister on his feet, it looks to me like, he's either about to build one of these nuclear submarines or he's got something even more important than that to do. I don't know if they talk themselves up. We've got to save the world here, but what's your take on it?
You look at his press conferences, it's like he talks as though he's got the weight of the country on his shoulder. He's the mayor of Canberra, for goodness sake. The mayor of Canberra, 400,000 people. And the bureaucracy around the ACT, like with health departments, education departments and all the rest of it, for 400,000 people, it's a glorified council. Let's be serious.
Lovely. Right, let's get into AUKUS. I don't know how much of this you saw coming, but gee, it was one of those breathtaking moments, didn't you think?
Oh, absolutely a breathtaking moment. I don't think anyone saw it coming. This was really kept under wraps for a very, very long time. I mean, there's been a lot of talks, studies and negotiations that have been going on to get to that point. No one saw it coming on Thursday morning when the Prime Minister held that address alongside Joe Biden and Boris Johnson. Yeah. Then we all went into a briefing which lasted for a good 90 minutes where the Prime Minister himself briefed the media, the key media outlets, about what this actually means. And I thought that was interesting. It was the Prime Minister, the Chief of Defence, Angus Campbell, and the Head of the Defence Department, Greg Moriarty, all briefing us about what this actually means and how it's actually going to work, and giving us a little bit of an idea of the context about how much work has gone into getting to this point. And the work that's gone into it has been quite amazing. It's taken about 12 to 18 months, where the Prime Minister was saying that, if we're going to junk this deal with the French, as we know, the Naval Group is been building the submarines for Australia. If we're going to junk that deal, because they were building conventional submarines, they're electric-powered submarines, he said he wanted to be super sure that if we were going to start building nuclear submarines, or nuclear-powered submarines, I should add, that if we were going to start building nuclear-powered submarines, that it was the right course of action, that the Americans would give us the access to the technology needed and all the rest of it. It is a big deal to junk a $90 billion contract, which you had with the French, which was already in train, to go for this whole new nuclear option.
Yes, and the contract, I think they call them, had gateways or gates.
Yes.
Where you could exit the contract. So
yes.
It's disappointing for the French, obviously. And I think they've cancelled a couple of US-French celebrations they had planned. They weren't too pleased with the Americans either. But you go back to that. I was quite taken by a piece, I think, from Rob Harris in the Herald yesterday, where he made the point that when the G7 Plus was happening and ScoMo was there and he couldn't get a meeting with Biden, everyone was saying, oh, look at this, he's been brushed. Joe Biden's brushed our Prime Minister. He's a joke. And he didn't have a one-on-one. He had a meeting with Boris as well. They were cooking this up.
That's exactly right. And that's what we were told yesterday in the briefing about that meeting at the G7. was all about AUKUS and how AUKUS could work and, what the potential of it was and all the rest of it. But the way it was characterised was, Joe Biden's the new president of the United States and already he's not willing to have a one-on-one meeting with Scott Morrison. Boris Johnson needs to be in that meeting as well. And of course, all the photos and the pictures were of Morrison, Johnson and Biden. But no one knew that in the background, what was being worked on was this AUKUS nuclear submarine deal. Yeah. And the interesting thing about it, I will say, Luke, the interesting thing about it is that what it proves is that Morrison has been able to do a deal with Joe Biden. A Democrat president, a lefty, has been able to do this deal with Joe Biden when, people like, as you say, quite rightly, people were writing him off. People were writing Morrison off saying that he can't deal with a president like Biden because they felt that he was really close to Donald Trump. But in the end, Morrison has done a deal with a Democrat president in Joe Biden, and it would have sideswiped Labor and Anthony Albanese when they were briefed about it themselves on Wednesday, because clearly people like Albanese likes to think that he has got a very close and personal relationship with Joe Biden.
Yeah. All that is really intriguing. I don't know where the ALP go with this. I saw
Richard supporting it at the moment.
Yes, Richard Marles was hammering the government over the waist, and I suppose they've got a fair point there. The expenditure of $2 or $3 billion for nothing would be better if it weren't the case, but if we end up with a better... this is meant to be, front and centre for our Navy for decades to come.
The region.
For decades to come. If you get it wrong, please go back and start again. Don't give us something that's, half-baked for the next 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, but let me tell you one thing about this. When it comes to a lot of these defence projects... one thing that we've got to keep in mind with this particular project, with the French project, it was signed off by Malcolm Turnbull in 2016, right? So it's not a very old project, okay?
Yeah.
And my understanding is it's only about 1 or 2% of it has only really been, I suppose, completed, for the want of a better word. We wouldn't have been getting a submarine for decades to come. And that's the same with this new nuclear deal. By the time we get a first submarine, it's still decades away. But my understanding, with the $90 billion French deal, a very small proportion of that money was spent. A very small proportion of that money was spent. There have been deals that have been done in the past, especially around the defence field, where, 20, 30, 40, even 50% of the money has been spent before a project has been junked. So the fact that we've only spent 1 or 2% and probably the exit will cost us $3 or $4 billion, it's better to spend the $3 or $4 billion rather than spend, $40 billion or $45 billion before you decide that you don't want to go ahead with a project anymore. Of course, you don't want to be, throwing away $3 or $4 billion. But one thing that the PM did say is that in the end, yes, $3 or $4 billion might seem like a lot of money, but we've also still built up a skills base.
True.
And that we have also we've already started building up capacity to be able to manufacture and do things when it comes to submarine production. So it hasn't all gone to waste.
China's unhappy, but, they were always going to be unhappy. And as much as I'd like to say, so what? They are pretty important in terms of trade, at least. So I don't know how we navigate our way through this. I guess we wait to see what they do next.
Well, absolutely. China is unhappy, and as you quite rightly say, that was very much expected. They've been using very volatile language through their mouthpiece, the Global Times. I think the big issue for Morrison now is he's got to actually start reassuring the region, because we're reading reports that Indonesia's not happy about it and they're starting to get worried. And I think we do have to keep in mind here, Luke, while plenty of countries in the region support Australia, they also support China. They don't have the sort of really volatile relationship with China that Australia currently has. There are a lot of other countries in the region that do work well with China. And, it's a bit of a balancing act for them. Like, they support and like and want to work with Australia, but they also support and like and want to work with China. So I do think that, the Prime Minister's got a bit of a job here to try and really, reassure countries in the region, especially Indonesia, that, this is all above board, that it's nuclear powered, it's not a nuclear weapon, and that, we won't be, importing radioactive material and all the rest of it. The way all of this has been done is pretty tight and through very strict rules.
I think I saw it might have been Dennis Richardson talking about this earlier, particularly in relation to the Indonesians. And he said, look, they weren't all that pleased when we were going to have Marines based in the Northern Territory, but they did come on board. You're right, it'll be diplomacy.
Yeah, managing it.
Yeah, and over some time we'll get hopefully some support. What do you make and what are you hearing about Christian Porter?
Look, I think this has become a bit of a headache for Scott Morrison. I think we've got to be realistic about that. I wouldn't be surprised if he falls on his sword this weekend. I mean, I don't know that will happen. I think that the Prime Minister will want to have this issue resolved before he heads off to Washington. So the PM heads off to Washington next week, and I think before he heads off, he wants this issue with Christian Porter resolved, I think, over the weekend. Essentially what's happened here is that Christian Porter has put on his parliamentary register, which is constantly updated by politicians, that a blind trust helped pay for his defamation action against the ABC. He doesn't know who donated to this blind trust. The opposition says, well, that sounds far-fetched. It doesn't pass the pub test. How could you not know who's donated $1 million to help fight your legal battles against the ABC? So what Prime Minister Morrison has done, he said, right, I want my department, that is Prime Minister and Cabinet and the head of Prime Minister and Cabinet, to look into this matter to see if Christian Porter has breached ministerial standards. And Morrison did that pretty much straight away. As soon as this story was out there and started gaining traction, he ordered his department to investigate whether or not Christian Porter had broken any ministerial guidelines, ministerial standards. And the reason that's important is this. Christian Porter is a cabinet minister. He's the industry minister. So he makes decisions. So whatever he puts on his register of pecuniary interest is important because people and the public need to be reassured that there's no conflict of interest when he's making a decision. And, and we're talking about the submarine deal. Well, as industry minister, as the federal industry minister, he's going to be probably having a bit of input into the way this is all going to start rolling out. So I do think that Christian Porter does need to decide what he's going to do with his future. My guess is that he will probably move to the backbench. A new industry minister will obviously have to be appointed, and it would not surprise me if Christian Porter also announces that he won't be contesting the next election. The reality is with Christian Porter, politically, he's a dead duck. So I think that that's the reality of Christian Porter's political career. I think it's dead in the water. I think that Christian Porter is a competent minister, a very competent minister. But the problem is these sorts of issues in the lead up to an election, I think become far too murky for both the Prime Minister and the government more broadly.
Interesting that. I had a chat to a legal mate of mine through the week, and he said the very reason you have a blind trust is for this. So Porter has no idea who contributed. It's
That's
a blind,
right.
and they use, and these aren't uncommon, but they're perfect for politics because he doesn't know who contributed to his legal bills. Now, there'll be plenty of people that thought he was harshly treated by some sections of the media and wanted to contribute. So a blind trust was the only way to go. So they go with a blind trust. And people that should know, so I'm talking about lawyers and his political opponents, know too well why you do it. But the political reality is somewhat distant from, it would appear, the legal reality. So, they can run this line.
That's what I'm talking about.
Exactly.
And what you're saying, Luke, is right. I think that your lawyer mates make a really good point. But in the end, this all now boils down to political reality. And the bottom line is Albanese will go to town if Porter remains in cabinet. And this is the other thing, is the reason why I reckon that this needs to be resolved over the coming days is because if Morrison goes overseas, Morrison wants the focus to be on the deals that he's doing overseas.
Yep.
People like Albanese back home in Australia are going to be wanting to try and take the focus off that and will basically make Porter the issue. Look, I'm not saying that Porter's done anything wrong, but politically and perception, it doesn't look good. And we've seen how well the Labor machine has worked in undermining the vaccine rollout and, bashing up quarantine. They could easily do it on an issue like this in Western Australia also, because Christian Porter's a West Australian MP. Of course, the government is, struggling in Western Australia and is trying to, maybe hold on and win some seats in WA. And, you're going to have Albo really going to town on all of this.
Yeah, you're right. Plus and despite what the court found or didn't find, the backstory to all of this.
They settled out of court. Porter and the ABC settled out of the court. The ABC paid some of Porter's legal bills, but obviously Porter's own legal bills mounted up.
But there'll be people that won't even accept the Porter's in the clear. So you think also from the point of view of his own, his own mental health, you think he'd probably be best getting out of it. And I don't know, one day, I know he was once treasurer, one day becoming Premier of Western Australia. They do need a strong Liberal over there, let's be honest. Where are we with COVID at the end of this week?
Look, I think we're pretty good with COVID. I mean, the vaccination rates are going up. We now got 70% first dose. About 24 million adults have had at least one dose of the vaccine. Within that cohort of 24 million, there's obviously people that have been double vaxxed. So, that's pretty good. That 70% of people 16 and over have been vaccinated. We probably have hundreds of thousands of people in that 12 plus age group as well that would have received their Pfizer dose as well. So I do think that that's good. And I wouldn't be surprised if one of the things that comes out of this US visit that the Prime Minister will be at next week is probably more doses of Pfizer coming our way. And of course, you've got now Queensland and Western Australia saying that Pfizer will be given to over 60s. And no doubt that's going to put a bit of a strain on Pfizer supply in those states. But it's such a selfish thing for both Queensland and Western Australia to be doing, given that AstraZeneca is a perfectly safe vaccine, is recommended for over 60s. And not only that, there's actually suggestions that Pfizer is even more potent against the Delta variant of the virus. But, forget about all that. People like Anastasia Palaszczuk and Mark McGowan just simply like, piling on AstraZeneca and creating hesitancy around it, which, is not needed. But generally, I would say that we're going well with this vaccine rollout. I think what it comes down to now is states like Victoria and New South Wales starting to reopen. We're seeing a bit more of New South Wales talking about home quarantine for return travellers, which I think is a great idea.
Great idea.
So trying to get people back who are stranded overseas back into Australia. They don't have to quarantine in a hotel. As of next month, New South Wales is going to be trialling quarantine at home for 7 days rather than 14. You'll be tracked to make sure that you are at home. And I think that that's a good idea to be starting to move down that path. And you'd assume that Victoria will move down that path next. Tasmania's moving down the home quarantine path. It's already been trialled in South Australia. So basically what you've got, Luke, is the Liberal states, New South Wales, Tasmania, South Australia, they're moving. They're trying to open up their economies, right? Which is what you need to do. Which is what you need to do. The Labor states, they're the laggards, especially Queensland and WA. Yeah. They're the ones with low vaccination rates and keeping their borders up for no damn good reason, while businesses in those states struggle.
Yeah, it's a fair point. We were talking about Christina Keneally last week. Where are things with that now? Courtesy of a submarine deal and one or two other things. It's escaped the attention of many, but are you hearing anything?
Look, she's obviously been pre-selected. I've noticed that she's been pretty quiet. I haven't seen her do much media, and that's because obviously she's in the firing line. Look, there's a lot of people that are upset within Labor ranks. There's no doubt about it, that she's been parachuted into a safe Labor seat in southwestern Sydney, that seat of Fowler. She lives on the northern beaches. Look, most people think that when it comes to Christina Keneally is that she probably will hold on to that seat of Fowler. It's a safe Labor seat. And I think we were saying last week, it more than likely will become marginal. But this is a lot of angst. It's caused a lot of angst for Albanese, and probably angst that Albanese really didn't need at this time. So it'll be interesting to see where things do go here, because if the Liberals decide to put up a good candidate against Christina Keneally in Fowler, that could cause a bit of a contest. The other thing that I'm hearing is that potentially a strong independent might emerge, a local candidate who's going to run as an independent, and they could potentially, win the seat, and Fowler becomes independent. It doesn't belong to either of the major parties.
Yeah, well, a Liberal Party that found a candidate that they could easily preference before Labor makes life very interesting.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And, I don't know who the Liberals would choose in that area, but you'd assume it would be a local, and to at least give Labor a run for its money. I mean, what the thing I suppose that would be going against the Liberals in Fowler is the margin. It's a fairly hefty margin that Labor holds that seat by. I think that Christina Keneally will reduce that margin because Labor people are telling me, and they've told me this for years, that she doesn't poll well.
No.
That generally voters don't warm to her.
Yeah.
People talk about her being this, amazing, having these amazing credentials,
star
this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
But, and being a star candidate. But the bottom line is she doesn't resonate, I think, with the public. She does come across as a bit of a whinger all the time. No one can do anything right. And I think that grates on people after a while.
Yeah, it does.
So, it'll be interesting to see what happens there, though.
I don't know how smart it was to make her elbows a tack dog. Now, before you go, I stumbled on these numbers today as I was preparing for today's show. And, we often get told, we've never been at the front of the queue and all that kind of gear. And there's been plenty of whinging and carry on about how... And look, no government's perfect, but just let me share these numbers with you.
Go for it.
Italy, 2,157. USA, 2,065. UK, 1,973. Germany, 1,111. Israel, 800. Canada, 716. Japan, 135. Australia, 44. That's the number of people per million who've died.
Yep.
I rested
That's right.
my cases.
Exactly. We have handled this pandemic extraordinarily well. And, we've got a health system to be proud of. And yes, as you quite rightly say, no government is perfect. And there have been mistakes that have been made along the way. But the argument that I've always made to you over a number of months now, Luke, is that in the end, when push comes to shove, when you're dealing with a situation that you've never dealt with before in a lifetime, you're bound to make some mistakes. But you know what? The amount of mistakes that we've made are absolutely negligible compared to some of the mistakes that have been made in other parts of the world, especially in the US and Europe when it comes to dealing with this disease. And even with the vaccines, pretty soon, my understanding is that we'll probably be eclipsing the US in the number of people that will have vaccinated. So their vaccination strategy may have started a lot earlier, as did that of Europe. But, pretty soon, Australia will eclipse the US per capita in the number of people that we would have had vaccinated, despite the absolute grief that, the government has gone through. The bottom line is they were able to get these vaccines, and it now does look as though, we're going to meet the targets, which we were originally always going to meet when the program started rolling out last year, or was being at least considered last year.
Indeed. Well done, mate. Always enjoy our chats. We'll have one next week.
No problems. Good on you, Luke. Have a good shift.
Thank you, Michael Packey.